if I could go back in time to your original question and have taped my mouth starting at an earlier age, or worked on my teeth, or worked on strengthening my jaw, or continued some sort of diaphragmatic practice, if I could have done all that, I don't think I would have experienced the yips. I really don't.
What is up, family? Welcome to another episode of the Advocate Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Hannaford, and today we have a really incredible guest. My guest today is Harvey Martin, who has spent the last 3 seasons in the major leagues with the San Francisco Giants as their human performance coach. Now, a lot of people, I would imagine, hear human performance coach and are really unsure of, well, what does that entail? What does that mean? And I can tell you, I don't know any other human performance coaches, so I was curious as well. You need to listen to this episode if you have an interest in trying to figure out ways, if you have a son, how to unlock a different level. Really, if you're a player and you're unaware of how you breathe, this is definitely an episode for you. We talk about all things physiology with the body. One of the things that I did learn in this episode, which I think that you guys will find value in, is we oftentimes talk about the mindset here on this podcast. And what I didn't realize is part of understanding the mind comes from how you're utilizing your physiology. And your physiology is really a foundation for you to put yourself in a good place to start to unlock and understand the mind in a more clear way. So whether you're a parent, a player, a coach, anybody involved in the game of baseball that truly wants to help these players reach a higher potential, this is an episode that you're going to want to listen to. We cover a whole host of topics, but I would love to kind of hear you guys' feedback after the episode. So feel free to DM me, send me a message. As you guys know, my focus is always on making sure that I am providing valuable content and helping you and your son ultimately become a better baseball player. So love you guys. Hope you enjoy the episode with Harvey Martin. All right, Harvey Martin, the man, the myth, the legend. Thanks for joining us on the show, buddy.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited for this.
All right. So obviously I have so much to get into with you, but I guess the first question I have, so you were, and correct me if I'm wrong, your title previously with the Giants was human performance coach. Is that right?
That is correct. Human performance coach.
And you were with the Major League Club for a few years. I saw you drinking a coffee. So when you're the director or the human performance coach, what is one drink in the morning to energize his body? What's in that cup?
What's in that coffee? That is an espresso, 1 shot of espresso. Actually, it might have been 2 shots of espresso, but either or, I'll peak out at like 2 to 3 shots of espressos in the morning with hot water, and then I put a little raw milk in there.
I love it. So you got a nice little caffeine buzz going right now. That's what makes me happy. I love that.
Yeah.
No, man, but let's jump into this. So, you know, as I think about kind of what I'll call kind of your resume and really what you've been through over the last 10, 15 years. So you were somebody who, like me, obviously you played in college, right? You were a pitcher.
Yeah.
You eventually were signed by I think it was the Milwaukee Brewers. You played some minor league baseball with them. Take us from that point now going forward. Where did your career go and how did you get to the place you're in right now?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, I think if I start with college, because I think that'll tie into that answer. I went to college for 6 years, and I in the time, it was fascinating because I went to Central Michigan for 4. I played there, position player, pitcher. I ended up getting an elbow surgery. I redshirted my first year. So after 4 years of being there, I played in 2 years, and I was partially, I was kind of finding myself. And when I transferred, so my last year, I kind of got in one of the injury years. They brought in a lot of really good recruits, and I kind of saw myself falling down the depth chart at CMU. So I went to Minnesota State, which I don't remember. I know exactly around like this 2012 time was when you couldn't transfer D1 to D1 anymore. I can't remember what the rules. I don't know what the rules are now, but I know that was something that was happening. So I go to this Division II in Mankato, and I was going there to get innings and potentially I wanted to play pro ball, right? And when I went there, the reason why I mentioned this is I obviously have a really good, successful college career. I signed to play with Milwaukee. I played 3 years in the minor leagues. But in that moment when I was at Minnesota State, they were opening this place called, I think it was called just Sport Performance or the Performance Center, but they were doing sports psychology. And I was not there to go to school. I got into grad school, obviously, because I was in college for 6 years. So you hope you're in grad school. But I was there because I wanted to play pro ball. They had this performance center. They were training with psychology. And I was learning about mental skills. And so I started taking these classes on psychology and sport performance and visualization and et cetera, a lot of what the field is. And I was doing it purely to just, how do I go to class, train my mind, do something physically, get to pro ball. And I mentioned this big moment in my life because that was the first time in my life that I was really intrigued and curious about school. And I was really into these classes. I still wasn't really planning on being a human performance coach someday or talking about psychology or being intellectually interested in topics. I found something there. And I think that plays because when I went to the Brewers, I got signed as a kind of like a low velo, sustainable right-handed stock pitcher. Could start, could relieve, could do all these things, see if he hangs around and makes it. But what I was really good at was throwing strikes. And my command was my bread and butter. That was my thing. So when I go to camp in 2015, I start noticing that I'm losing a little bit of that command. And I'm not knowing what's happening just yet, but this is the first time in my life that I'm starting to experience my one true skill start to diminish. Now, I had some of this educational background in psychology, so I had some tools and some emotional, I'd say some emotional regulatory tools, we'll just consider it that I felt was advantageous as an athlete. I kind of felt that was sort of my edge. I had this calmness about me, this composure about me, and I threw strikes, and this was what I was going to use to get to the big leagues. So in 2015, I started throwing balls, and eventually these minor control issues started to get into my head, and I started to perceive these bullpens or these outings that I was going to have. I started to sort of see what was going to happen before it would happen. For example, I could tell I was throw a ball in the dirt in the left-hander's batter's box. I could tell that was going to happen. And then I could tell if a lefty got in, I was going to hit this lefty. And I just started spiraling in my brain. And eventually, probably by the end of camp, I had a very minor / moderate level of the yips. And I wasn't, as you know, the sports world, you don't say that out loud when you're playing. You don't consider those things, but I was feeling this. And then I got into season. I was starting to feel this pressure on me. And about a month or two into it, Matt, I couldn't throw a ball. I've said this for, over 10 years now that I remember it, but I couldn't throw a ball inside a turtle at some points. The batting cage for people who are listening to this are maybe not familiar with that side of it, but if you ever go to BP and you see them hitting underneath the turtles, I was throwing balls outside of that. I was throwing balls 40 feet in the dirt. I had a really heavy case of yips and anxiety. And eventually in the middle of that summer, I got released. So, I'm in this field now, which is really fun. And it's been a blast for me and it's evolved. But when I had the yips, it was really frustrating because I just got done telling you I was studying sports psychology. I was this guy who has command and can't have the yips. And so when I got out of it, it wasn't necessarily something that I was I want to go build a career around this. It was I need to figure out my own stuff. What was that? What was anxiety? What was a depression? What were these feelings that I was having? And then in short, and I'm sure this will lead us to a lot more, but in short, that off season, I was getting calls from teams and had offers for independent teams and those sort of things. But that off season, I knew I was never going to play again. I met a guy who was not in the sports field. He's a good friend of mine now, Daniel Wilson, but he was doing breathwork at this gym that I was training at. And I just went up to him curious one day, and I was like, hey, I've been studying breathing. I've been studying breathwork for a few years now because that was in the field I was studying. That's obviously a part of pro sports. But he was showing me something different. And it's now popularized as the Wim Hof method. But in 2015, this was like still kind of under wraps. Like, who's this Wim Hof? What is this breathing? What is all this stuff? And he just kind of challenged me to not be a baseball player or an athlete. It was more like figure out your anxiety, like figure out your body, get in tune with what you're feeling, these sensations and whatnot. So I didn't necessarily train with him, but I practiced with him for the fall in 2015 when I lived in Minnesota. And I had a goal in mind that I would swim in Lake Minnetonka, which is a really big lake in Minneapolis. For people who've been around there, I'm sure you would know it. But I had a goal that I would carve holes in the ice. I would swim in the water and I would control my breathing, and I would do that with just my own free will. And that, to me at the time, was mind blowing. That was something that I thought truly would kill you. Now that's become demystified to me, and I've done that with thousands of people, right? So you kind of lose that feeling, but at the time that would end me. So it was like, this is something I'm just going to pursue. And in that winter in 2015, I was able to do it. I swam. I still remember I did 7 minutes, which was, monumental to me. I swam in the lake in December 2015, and I just did breath work before going in the water. I did breath work coming out of the water, and it was all going to be self-regulatory system. How can I use my breathing to really challenge my physiology? I'm using these words now. I didn't know that at the time, right? But something in that water that day clicked with me. And it was like, that's different than anything I've ever studied. That wasn't a book. That wasn't a psychological term. That wasn't visualization. That wasn't self-talk. That wasn't all these things I've kind of been going through for the last couple of years, trying to create tools to help me, especially in the last year, to get over this anxiety. That was real, tangible, actual things that took place in the moment and brought me to the present so aggressively that I really, in really short, simple way, I just dedicated my life to trying to understand that feeling. And what that feeling has now moved forward almost a decade later, what that feeling and that experience has come down to is what it's taught me about performance in general. Is I don't discredit psychological work. I think it's beautiful and I deeply practice it. But if I'm looking at performance, or I'm looking at what my mind is or what my thinking is, that taught me that it's physiology first. And you look at things physiologically first, meaning your nervous system, your senses, your awareness to these sort of things. And what that did for me personally was that started to strengthen my physiology. Cold water, obviously turned into saunas, turned into a lot of stuff that I do now. But breathing and cold exposure was my first introduction to the importance of training your nervous system to be more resilient, to be more adaptable, to be flexible. And basically my perspective was shattered. And I looked at performance, mental skills performance, that is, as a physiological first, principle driven, that's where you start. That's the foundation. And that's when light bulbs started going off, right? Because a couple of years later goes down the road and I started realizing, wow, I could take mental skills, make it somewhat tangible, which is what athletes crave. They can train, they can get better, they can feel and see themselves getting better. And that should translate to a heightened psychology. And then I think, over time, the Giants were the first time in 2021, I signed with the Giants as a consultant, and I was a breathing specialist. I was purely doing breath work and doing some cold exposure and some sauna exposure and kind of hanging out with the boys and taking them through some sessions. In 2022, that turned into the title human performance coach, like you said. And I really like that title more than mental skills. Like I said, never discrediting that title or that craft by no means. I'm just talking purely for me. I like the title human performance because I think it allows for that, what I just said. It allows for physiology before psychology. And now you're getting these performance things that are more trainable, tactical, objective, and we can kind of make progress. And then I think on the back end, if you're going to be a human performance coach, again, this is just my opinion, I think you should definitely be qualified and have experience in mental skills work and psychological training. But I think that that's after physiology. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. All right, I've got a ton of questions for you. What I'm wondering is, well, I guess a comment first. One of the things that I've always struggled as I've communicated with various mental skills coaches is there's generally a belief system that a lot of these individuals kind of employ, right? It's mental strength, it's awareness, it's like, you can use any of the buzzwords, but there's a belief system that they all have. But as somebody who is now what I would call kind of a student of psychology and really understanding the mind, what I have struggled with is witnessing players who say, okay, I'm buying into the thing. I'm going to listen to you, coach, like help me. And they say, okay, here are the 3-4 things that I think you can do that would help you. And they do it. And then there's this point in time where it's like, okay, did it work? Did it not work? And I feel like these guys are constantly riding this roller coaster. And that's a little bit about like just life in general.
Sure.
And what I'm wondering as I'm hearing you talk is if we could go back to that young man who was with the Milwaukee Brewers, who's like, oh, wait a second. Like, I'm known to be the guy that has the command. I've now lost the one thing that I have. I don't have the velo, right? And that thought, that question now enters your mind. What do you believe that if you were to talk to that man today, knowing what you know about breathwork, how would you direct him to work on that? I don't want to call it an issue, but like that predicament.
Oh man, I got to tell you, Matt, I love that question because so often when I've had conversations like this, I've wanted that question because I think that I'm going to answer that directly. Usually I try to get to this point because, I have braces on right now. They're behind my teeth here, but I'm trying to widen out my teeth structure, right? And I've taped my mouth shut for sleep for probably 8 years or so. Regularly, if I take a nap, I got to tape my mouth shut. If I am working on a computer a lot, sometimes I will tape my mouth shut. I'm trying to get my teeth structure to be improved, and they're way better than they were, a year ago and 30 some years prior. But the reason why I love that question is because I firmly believe this. Now, I could back this up with a ridiculous amount of science and research too, but I'm just going to talk purely off experience, is that I grew up and I became a mouth breather, right? My teeth were very crooked, still somewhat are. I had strep throat my entire life. I was a very, anatomically, I was unsound in my body. I was injured a lot, all these certain things. If I could go back to the guy and talk to him today, honestly, I would tell him the most simplest thing of you need to tape your mouth when you go to sleep. You need to start training with water in your mouth so that you breathe only through your nose. You need to start doing breath work to strengthen your diaphragm. And why I say these things is if Harvey could have done that 12 years ago, 15 years ago, my physiology would have changed. And because I was this chronic mouth breathing person for 25 years, when you breathe through your mouth, the signal of a mouth breath is a fight or flight. It's a very simple thing. Like people who are listening, if you just take a deep breath through your mouth as I'm talking, you should feel your initial movement is in your chest. It's in your chest. If you take a deep breath through your nose, you should feel your initial movement is a little bit lower, more diaphragmatic, right? So nature set us up very simply for those physiological triggers of the moment. So when I take a breath through my mouth, there's a heightened sense of stress. I'm in an upper part of my lung, which is where there's way less exchange of oxygen purely based off of gravity. So if I sit there and I look at my lungs, there's 3 parts to your lungs. The bottom of your lungs is filled with oxygen because of gravity. It's pulling blood and oxygen down. So when I breathe through my nose, you can actually feel, you probably feel it as I'm talking, you can feel your diaphragm coming down purely by nasal breathing. I can get in there. Well, that starts filtering oxygen into your heart and into your blood system and all throughout the muscle tissue. So if I'm oxygenated, all of a sudden my brain goes, I'm free. And that's where you feel euphoric or aerobic or you feel calm naturally. So that's the state of breathing that you want to be in 24/7. Now, if you're pitching in the World Series, Garrett Cole is a perfect example. If you go watch film of him the other day, he's breathing through his nose for the first 4 innings. The Yankees have that crazy inning. If people are listening, if you go back and watch after he didn't cover first, go and look at his eyes and watch how he's breathing. And you'll see him breathing through his mouth and his eyes start to swell up and his face gets red, right? Those are all physiological responses to heightened stress. It's an acute, for him, it was acute, and he's creating this acute situation. And anyone who's been in high performance knows when you're panting, over breathing, your vision starts to narrow, you start getting reactive and you start getting emotional. You can't problem solve because it's turning off parts of the brain, right? And that's really important. Now, if you're me and you chronically were mouth breathing for 25 years, well, guess what? Something's going to break. And in my case, it was anxiety. It was the yips. It's not an anxiety. I don't believe it was an anxiety off of my perspective on life. I don't think it was. I mean, sure, we've all had traumatic experiences as kids and whatnot, or things that have made us who we are, and we have these reactive moments. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the pure fact that I was physiologically unsound for 25 years of my life. And I think that my aggressiveness and competitiveness in sports, it ran its course. My organism went, okay, it's been 26 years of this. Like, if you're not going to heal and take care of yourself, you're going to break. And the body, mentally or physically, it will break if we don't know. And this is all injuries in general. That's any sort of injury, physical or mental. It's basically, you've been getting these signs and you're not paying attention. So it needs to break for you. And so I really think that my case of anxiety at that time was purely physiological. And it was based off the fact that I grew up a mouth breather. You can look at pictures of me when I was a kid, and you can see me breathing through my mouth while I sleep. You can see me breathing through my mouth as I get older. I have, like I said, my jaw structure is weak. It's devolved. And so I think over the course of, all that pounding, I mean, I played competitively, if you consider college competitive ball. I played competitively for a decade. And I think after that, I think it just caught up to me. And I didn't have the nervous system that was able to adapt. And so after it stopped adapting, it was just suppressing, and then boom, it broke. And that came in my case, that came in the case of anxiety. And I can talk more about some of those things, but I think that's probably a good spot for me to pause for a second.
Yeah. So I guess the question I have for you, and just for the listener, obviously I'm going to count myself as a listener right now because I'm learning from you. Is a good test on whether or not you're a mouth breather. Do I breathe through my mouth when I sleep? Because I can tell you, I've been doing that my whole life.
Yeah.
Like, is that a good test for people to think like, oh, I wonder if I'm a mouth breather or not? Because I feel like so much of what you're talking about, I would consider myself a highly self-aware human being.
Sure.
And I'm not aware of how I breathe until you bring that up to me. And now I'm cognizant as you're speaking, like, oh, I need to close my mouth and I need to breathe through my nose. And I'm hearing you talk and I'm experiencing exactly what you're saying in the moment. So I want to help the listener. How can they determine whether or not they're a mouth breather or not?
Yeah. Well, first of all, like, we're not set up to count all our breaths all day or be aware of them. You think about if we had to sit here and think about breathing the whole time, there's no shot we'd be able to talk. So we're made to, the thinking aspect of being a human is to go out and solve problems and make progress and evolve the species. And that's what we're here to do. So breathing is, and I'm going to get to that answer, but I just want to comment on that because it's the same way, right? Breathing it's an unconscious act. Why it's the foundation of my teaching is because it's the only thing in your unconscious body that you can make conscious. You can't consciously tell your heart rate to do what you want it to do. Now, you can breathe your way into controlling your heart rate. I can upregulate and have a higher heart rate with my breath. I can downregulate my breathing. I can lower my heart rate, right? But I can't tell these automatic functionings of my body. I can't tell them what to do. I can consciously make breathing present, which is why I think it's such a tool in sports or even this podcast. Like, when I am done talking to you right now, as I talk, I'm breathing through my mouth. When I'm done talking to you and I pass the ball to you and you talk, I should get right down back to my breathing through my nose because now I'm down regulating. So think about As a performer, I'm pitching, fine, compete, breathe through your mouth, do your thing, get in the dugout, get off the ice, get on the sidelines, breathe through your nose. And you're just going back and forth. For people who want to be able to understand what they're doing, it's real simple. Like, let's just start with a philosophical view of it first. Ideally, most of the principles, the teachings you're going to hear from people like myself out there that talk about breathing or breath work is that you are only breathing through your mouth when you're training intense. So any aerobic exercise, you should be nasal breathing. Any walk, slow jog, or elliptical, whatever that stuff is, you should have some sort of a capacity to breathe through your nose. If you can't handle that, you have a lower aerobic capacity. But in general, if I'm sprinting, if I'm training hard, if I'm competing, if I'm playing sports, whatever, then I can breathe through my mouth because I'm burning fuel. That's fine. When I'm talking, I'm breathing through my mouth. So think about, and you probably talk a lot throughout the day, right? Think about days you give speeches. Like people give a speech for an hour and a half, they're exhausted because you're dumping out fuel in your mouth breathing the whole time you talk. So people who have high talking professions, they get fatigued rather quickly. And that's where at the end of the day, you feel reactive or you can't retain information because you've dumped so much carbon dioxide at the time, but you're just mouth breathing the entire day. So it's intense exercise, it's talking, and then eating. Those are really the 3 times that you would be breathing through your mouth and not stressing about it. You know, that's part of life. Other than that, I should be nasal breathing at all times. So if I wake up often throughout the middle of the night, and these are basics for sleep. Like if you sleep with water next to your bed, which is a high population, that's because your mouth is drying up essentially, right? And you just haven't really thought about your breathing. And so I'm going to have water next to the bed. And when I wake up, I'll take the sip, I'll get my mouth watered again, and I'll go back to sleep. Well, back to what I was saying about mouth and nose breathing. When you breathe through your nose, you have saliva. That's a parasympathetic tone. That's a rest, digest, adaptable tone. Sleep is purely built for adaptation. So when you wake up in the middle of the night and you have a dry mouth is a sympathetic fight or flight tone. I'm not saying it's definitely part of the state of sympathetic, but it's a tone of that. So if you're waking up with a dry mouth, yeah, you're sleeping. You're not getting the full sleep because you're in fight or flight. You're not in the state that sleep is truly built for. So that would be one indicator that you're definitely breathing through your mouth. The obvious one of all obvious ones is that you snore, right? Or you have some sort of sleep apnea, which is incredibly high now, right? And COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, is extremely high now, and especially in these Western civilizations. So you're seeing us become bad breathers, and I'll talk about that in a second too. I'm getting excited thinking about this, so just hang with me, whoever, who's listening. But you look at it like that. If you're a snorer, you have sleep apnea, if you have water next to the bed, I think if you have frequent trips to the bathroom, having to pee often is a sympathetic state. So you're in those processes. And then if you have brain fog, if you're not waking up ready to go, if you don't feel like you can retain information, these are all because under the conscious awareness, unconsciously, you're breathing the entire day. And if you're feeling or experiencing these sort of things, this is because your unconscious respiratory system is telling your nervous system that I'm in fight or flight. I'm in some sort of chronic state of stress. It's not high stress. That's not what I'm talking about. You're just in a chronic loop of that, right? Now we can get through it all day, every day. And that's what we've become so good at as species, because we slug the 7 espressos, and we have our uppers and our downers, and we have our things. But if you're talking about really getting after your vitality and really having a health source, I mean, you should study your breath and create an idea in a 24-hour circle or cycle of how do I feel like I'm breathing, and how do I get to the nose? And that's why I say, I obviously this is incredibly hypothetical, but if I could go back in time to your original question and have taped my mouth starting at an earlier age, or worked on my teeth, or worked on strengthening my jaw, or continued some sort of diaphragmatic practice, the diaphragm's a muscle, so I can strengthen that. If I could have done all that, I do believe that I don't think I would have experienced the yips. I really don't think I would have encountered that.
And I think conceptually, even as you're talking and I'm focusing on breathing through my nose, I can certainly feel my heart rate lower. There's a calming sensation that I think you go through. So is it fair to say for any athlete listening who is totally unaware of their breath, that they should be mindful. And I would like to actually get into this. Like, what are some of the things that you would talk to the Giants players about specifically related to the breath? I'm assuming if I was a Giants player, I'm coming up to you and I'm saying, Harvey, look, man, this is kind of what I'm experiencing. Like, what do you got for me?
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you would provide to them?
Well, the first thing you can do, and this is just a tangible thing for everybody, is you can measure the length of your exhale, which is a carbon dioxide test. And really just like, obviously anyone listening can pause and start over. I'll just tell the part of the test so it's easy for you to have. But really just look at it as like you get yourself into that calm nasal breathing state, maybe spend a minute or two in it, breathing rather rhythmic. And then when you get focused, you just take 3 breaths in and out through your nose, whatever. Right. And then on your fourth one, you just take a bigger inhale. So my fourth inhale is of a little pause at the top. And then with your phone or a stopwatch, you just let your air leak out through your nose as slow as you can. And you find how long you can exhale and you time the length of that exhalation. And, ideally, a lot of times if no one's ever done that before or strengthened themselves to be able to breathe through their nose or done a CO2 test, they'll go 20, 25 seconds maybe. But I think I've never had an athlete who's not able to, at least once they get aware of it, able to exhale for 70 to 90 seconds, right? And it sounds like that's really loud and crazy, but it's not when you start to really train your breathing. The reason why I say that CO2 is because your exhalation is programmed with parasympathetic. So and I'm using all these words, let's just call it calm. So my exhalation is promoting calm, lower heart rate. My inhalation is promoting heightened, higher heart rate. So if I breathe rhythmically, that's homeostasis, right? That's why that natural nasal breathing throughout the day, you kind of live in this really good homeostatic level, which is beneficial for all of us, right? Now, if I go into training, what happens to breathing? This is what I was talking about Garrett Cole the other night. Like all of a sudden you start to breathe more. This is what happens to kids. This happens to babies, right? And you start to see the thing breaking down. And so just imagine what's happening when you start to inhale a lot more. The heart rate goes up, the blood starts to constrict, the oxygen starts to leave the muscle tissue, and you start to get anaerobic. You start to get stressed. And that's like if you watch fighters, the first guy who really goes to that panting typically loses the match. In hockey, I used to work a lot in hockey. We used to always talk to the guys who are mouth breathing on the ice. Those are the guys that you're going after. That's the guy you're going to hit because he can't see the ice. He can't see peripherally, right? And so I'm getting off on a tangent there, but go back to the exhale. Your exhale is important to track. It's somewhat subjective. Now, obviously, it's both. It's subjective and objective because you're the one that has to really know if you're getting that time right. But what I saw a lot in sports, I see a lot in sports, is that the travel and the time changes and the environmental changes, hot to cold, night to day, the injury, everything. I saw that impacts physiology drastically. So what you see is a guy, let's say a guy has a 90-second exhalation on the CO2, and we go from the Bay to Colorado to Arizona. Well, just think about that. If you did that in 6 days for a vacation, you'd be fatigued, right? You go to high elevation. These guys are playing on a regular basis. So if I go from a bay in San Francisco to a mountain range with elevation, a little bit cooler temps, and then I go down to hot temps and I'm in a desert, all that air particle, all that elevation changes, the pressure of a flight, all that stuff. What you'll see a lot if people are physiologically unsound, you'll see their CO2 sort of get cut in half. So if they have this baseline of like a 90-second exhalation, then you'll see them have like a 60-second exhalation when they get back to San Francisco, or a 50-second exhalation. So you'll see it get chopped. Does that make sense? And what will happen when you can't control your exhale, that's telling you in real time that your nervous system's not catching up or it's not where it needs to be. And I think that that's important specifically for sports, but not just athletes. It's important for all of us to have that because now all of a sudden you have a true awareness. You're not using a whoop. You're not using technology to tell you where you're at. You are getting real-time feedback from your breathing on how your nervous system is handling real-time stress. So if I know that my exhalation is hard or it's weak or I can't feel that flow that I usually feel, there's a lot of things that are happening. Like, you could potentially be starting to get sick and you could be coming into this sickness. You could have not been sleeping well. You could be stressed out. Your body might not be adapting. And so that gives you access to making, in my opinion, decisions about the day. And you see a lot of stuff, especially in my field, of cold tubs or saunas or these sort of things. And no matter what, everyone will do a 3-minute cold tub, right? No matter what, because that's what it's said to do. 3 minutes every day, at whatever degree. But if you can't breathe well or your nervous system's not adapting well, that should tell you, like, I'm not going to just do the deadlift to do the deadlift. That's how guys get hurt. I'm not just going to keep going into the cold tub to go in the cold tub. That's how guys burn too much fuel. I'm not going to just waste a lot of speech in this conversation. You see what I'm saying? You can start to create, in your word there, you can start to create mindful awareness of understanding how to adapt or be flexible in my day-to-day training based off of where my nervous system is at. And I think that's a really good tool. There's a couple more things I want to say about it. Is that kind of creates some sort of a picture of the importance of that?
Yeah, undoubtedly.
Yeah, I that's a good one. And I think that anyone who's not an athlete too that's listening, they should just create a relationship with that. So I wanted to touch on that because that's really important. And I think that should be trained and understood. I think when I look at athletes, it's really simple. There's one thing I do that I originally have everyone breathe in front of me from the front and the side, and I look at how their body moves. So I look at how, if you take, like we just did on the podcast already, I have someone breathe through their mouth and feel their upper chest move. I have someone breathe through their nose and feel their ribs move. And what I found over thousands of athletes and general pop over the last 10 years or so is that we just breathe into our shoulders. We breathe vertically. And it's really just in my opinion, it's a byproduct of society. It's pretty hard, right? Like, we sit all the time, we travel, we do all these things, we don't move well. And so we become these vertical breathers, which is naturally a state where you're not mechanically sound. The diaphragm's not moving horizontally. So if I don't know if you can kind of see, if I grab like my ribs down here, right? If I'm sitting there with an athlete specifically, I have them take their hands and grab the bottom of their ribs and just squeeze it like you're squeezing like if you have clamps on a table or whatnot. And you got to get someone to breathe horizontally. That's like whoever I'm talking to any day, every day. You got to get them to breathe through the nose horizontally and get the diaphragm to expand and get that to move 360 degrees. So as you're sitting in your chair and you're breathing through your nose right now, can you feel your back breathing into the chair? You got to be mindful to do that, right?
Oh,
can
yeah.
Can you feel your ribs expanding horizontally? And when you get that movement, then it's working at a base. You want to get mechanics down first, right? Because once I train that diaphragm, the diaphragm's a fascinating muscle because it doesn't have nerve endings on it. So it doesn't get these responses like a bicep. You and I go do curls, we're going to tap out when the bicep says I'm done, right? And we're going to get that stress response and it'll adapt on its own. Imagine if our diaphragm spent the middle of the day, goes, no, Harv, I'm good for today. You would die. So it's not something that is going to do that for you. So it has to become a mindful practice where you're strengthening this diaphragm to move horizontally for you. And once that takes place, going back to what we've already kind of talked about, if you can rewire someone who unconsciously breathes vertically, north and south, and doesn't use that diaphragm to get full access of the lungs and push on the organs and get that heart activated, if you can rewire that and train the muscle, now all of a sudden you're getting a ton of return on investment because you're unconsciously breathing soundly, right? And if we can rewire that movement so that when you breathe, you don't even think about it and you breathe horizontally, you're not into your upper chest, you're not getting that lack of oxygen exchange, you're not anatomically unsound, you're getting that movement, that's where you get a ton of benefit, like tons of benefit. So you have to get that to happen immediately. In my opinion, that's practice training. It doesn't take long, a week or two of just like conscious awareness reps. Then you implement that into training. You put that into a cold tub. You put that, whatever, like just so you break this upper chest breathing. Once that's in line, you move up the chain, right? Now we can talk about physiology. Now we can do some breath practices. We can breathe fast. We can breathe slow. We can do holds. We can start to really stress our nervous system. We can do less breathing in a cold tub. We can do breath holds while we train, et cetera, to make the physiology stronger. And that's kind of how we started the podcast, is like, how do I improve my physiological capacity to do more in life? Because once I do that, then we go up the other chain to the peak, and we're in psychology. And that's where I think now we start to talk about these concepts. Because if I've created this base in my body and in my nervous system where I have a capacity to handle resilience, and I can be flexible, and I can travel to Colorado to Arizona, back to the Bay, and I can compete every day, and I can sleep good, and I can down regulate, up regulate naturally. Well, you're going to give yourself an advantage mentally, because you've now created the space consciously to think and create and have control of your emotions. And that is subjective, I think, but ideally that's the goal, right? That's what we're all trying to do, not just in sport. It's like, how do I have the physiological capacity, the health, the vitality, so that I have enough space to handle day-to-day stimulus? When it comes into my life, I don't react. I respond and I solve things, and boom, boom, boom. I can keep thinking. And if I can think in under pressure in real time, in my experience, and I've worked with a lot of people, not just in sport, I've worked with a lot of people, and people who do that are very successful. Internally, externally, whatever you want to call it. I just think they have a very good grip on who they are, and they're very aware. And while we're here on the earth, why wouldn't we try to make as much of that capacity as we could? So I want another deeper thought on that. But if I'm working with an athlete, that's the pillars. Let's get the base of the mechanics down. Let's teach them the importance of the nose and the mouth, what that's doing to the muscles, what that's doing to your physiology. Then let's really do some fun stuff with the breath work to get the physio to get moving. And then let's just have deep conversations so that you think and challenge your perspective.
All right. Question for you as it pertains to dealing with these pro athletes, right? What was some of your biggest challenges? As I sit here and I listen to this, I think it makes all the sense in the world, right? I think everybody, whether you're an athlete or not, is searching for kind of that flow state, because when we're in that flow state, it's like life. We're, again, to use the term, we're in flow. It's everything is coming easily. We're thinking clearly. As you said, we're solving problems, right? So if we can aspire to be in this flow state, I think it makes perfect sense that the breathing helps allow us a calmness to kind of enter into that place. I think knowing big leaguers, they have habits already built in, right? How much resistance did you experience with guys saying, what?
Great question.
I was told something different. I mean, was that a hurdle or a challenge that you had?
Yeah, I think that's a challenge. I think that challenge gets highlighted a lot in my field, but I think from also as an observer, I think that's a challenge for everybody. I think that's a challenge for all staff members and coaches and anything. I think it just really gets highlighted in my field. I wouldn't have an answer for why that is, but I think that that's just my opinion, perspective of it. Of course, I've had resistance, and I have resistance. I'm going to answer that selfishly first of my own life, because, what I've learned a lot is, I told you that story about me swimming in a lake, almost 10 years ago. When that happened, that changed my life. That changed my perspective on living. And I've only gotten deeper into that, right? Well, what I found when I first changed my life and quote unquote became enlightened, right, through this moment, and I took the glasses off and I have a new set on, right? When you first do that, again, this is my experience, you think that the whole world should do that and you're going to change the world. And that's how I was going to do it. I'm going to change the world. And then it got to the point where I was going to change baseball. I'm going to change Major League. I'm going to change it all. This is what we're going to do. And this is so important. And you couldn't have proved me opposite of that, because my life had been changed. So the only thing I wanted was for your life to be changed. And I wanted to share this life-changing experience.
Hold on. Let me interject. Let me interject real fast and just make sure the listener understands. Are you saying the reason why your life changed is because in your mind before having done the exercise of swimming in the freezing cold water,
Mm-hmm.
that thought and that exercise would have been next to impossible?
Yeah.
Like, and then you did it
Mm-hmm.
using your breath and you realized if I can do this,
Mm-hmm.
what else can I do? Is that why you
100%.
say it changed your life?
Yeah. And I think at the same time too, like I started to notice I wasn't having anxiety. I was having panic attacks on a regular basis. And now all of a sudden I'm not having panic attacks. Like I haven't had strep throat or an issue with that in many, many years. So I have had these changes, right? And to your point, yeah, it's like, I want to go and give this to everybody, and you should be doing this, right? And I don't discredit that thought, because if I didn't have that thought, would I have made it to the big leagues? I don't know. I was so driven to just, why I say that is because if you had resistance to me talking about these things with you years ago, I almost like couldn't hear the resistance because I was so bought into what I was doing and what life was and these practices. And so I couldn't like hear you. And I think that like delusional naiveness of wanting to change the world helped me, because I didn't waste any time, especially in my 20s and even my early 30s. And even when I first got into the big leagues, I really didn't hear people have resistance because I couldn't comprehend that you would in the first place. Right. And I use the word delusional because I really do believe it had a lot to do with this delusional feeling and thought that I had. Now, 4 years in the big leagues, and I'm years later now, that delusionalness, that naiveness has been broken a little bit, because now I've had so much impact of pro athletes. And beforehand, when I was a client or consultant or I ran a business, you were coming to me because you wanted to, right? So when you go into a big league clubhouse, it's not like they all have to work with you. They're not your client. And so that 4 year pursuit, I think what it did for me, to answer that question today, is it made me take off another set of glasses, right? And I have this new set of glasses on because I have had resistance and I have found resistance. And I have had people be like, no, this is what I do, or this is what I've done, or I don't believe that, or I don't agree with that. And when I first was having that, I met resistance with resistance. I was like, well, let's go, like toe for toe. And I hung in there and wanted to sell and prove everything. And not until my third year in the league did I take my glasses off for a variety of reasons. And I put on a new set. And I would say in the last year, something that I would pat myself on humbly on my own back that I've done as a teacher is I don't think either of them are right. I don't think that I'm going to change you or I should change you. And if I do have something to tell you, should I even share that with you? What's the point of being a teacher? Ideally, if I lose the curiosity of my own self that I originally started with in 2015 in that lake, then I lose my ability to continuously learn and try to stay ahead of the athlete, not in an egotistical way. That I feel like is my job. My job is to stay ahead as best as I can so that I have something to offer you if you want it and if the time's right. And what my new thought process on this is that I really don't think I've tried to do anything but meet anybody where they're at. And that's changed. That was, like I said, I just ran you through almost 10 years of teaching. But I would say this year, more than anything, to that original question, do I meet that? Of course I meet resistance, but people meet me and I'm resistant too. And so it's like, do either of us have to be right or wrong here? Or are we just entering the space in a position of trying to learn each other? And as I've transferred into that, I've really found myself not even knowing if what I teach is necessarily right. Like it's more me in this constant discovery phase. And when you can meet big leaguers where they're at, which is drastically different because you have a 23-year-old and a 37-year-old on the same team, someone's made drastically different numbers financially, has had multiple more coaches or been on different organizations, there's obviously, we're not even talking about the diversity of the league and where we all come from around the world. And so really what I've learned is that there really isn't resistance if you're just meeting people and you're just sitting there listening to them and you're available if needed. But at the same time, I can also be very much wrong. And I think that I don't know if I have the exact words for that necessarily, but I would say my lens has gone to that. And I don't know how that necessarily happened. I tried to explain it just now, but I think when you meet big leaguers, they're a big leaguer for a reason. And I've told many of them this. The thing that I admire about Major League Baseball players and professional athletes in general is that they make art in real time and it's spontaneous. A movie, if you and I go watch a movie, we have a pretty good idea how it's going to start, what the middle is going to be like, and what the end is. A rom-com's been the same rom-com forever. But a sporting event, no one knows what the last inning is going to be. No one knows what the result is. And I think that makes it as a viewer so fun to watch. And these athletes are artists in real time, and they're making their art in spontaneity. And I think for me in general, my time in the big leagues, I had more excitement watching artists perform in real time than telling them how to perform. I have no idea how to do that. I've never done that. So I really became like a quiet observer. And I think that naturally the resistance started to fade, and I built a lot of really powerful relationships because we seem to be in it for the same thing. How do I master the art? And how do we help each other continuously push the envelope of what that art could possibly be?
Okay. So if you had, let's just say you had a 12-year-old son,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he is playing travel baseball. I want to give these listeners, these parents, and these young players who up to this point haven't even been aware of breathing,
Sure.
right? I mean, I can tell you that I talk to a lot of our clients about it and they're 16, 17, 18 years old. And you ask them like, hey, I notice you're not breathing in the box. Like you're not taking a deep breath. And they're just completely, oblivious, the majority of them. Like, oh, really? I didn't even know that. So how would you help shepherd this young 12-year-old, 13-year-old through and the reason I say, imagine this is your son, because if you had a son, you'd make sure he was doing it the way that you truly believe needs to be done.
Yeah, that phrasing helps me because I think if I had a son who's 12 in those states, I would try to create as many things for the kid that allows them to become aware of their senses and have confidence in knowing what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. And I think that that's drastically hard now because your senses are very dull the way that we exist now. You're not really getting many sensory inputs that really challenge you to get a grip on what you're feeling. And I see that a lot with younger athletes in the big leagues. Obviously, you see that a lot of younger athletes in sport is that when you're in a game and you can't comprehend what you're feeling, your only result is to lash out, is to emotionally react. You don't know what's going on. And that's like you use not breathing in the box. When you're holding your breath, that's a stress response. It's just a tightened, constricted, I can't get this rhythmic flow in me, right? So I just keep holding. And when that happens, we've already talked about what happens to the brain. You just start to emotionally respond to the moment. And that's where like people yell at each other, right? I used to tell this in colleges all the time when I would speak. If you have a girlfriend, it's just always landed with the college kids. I would always tell them, if you have a girlfriend and she's yelling at you, tell her to calm down while she's yelling at you and see how good that works, right? It just compounds and it gets even bigger. And well, we're mouth breathing in those situations. We're panting, we're reactive. And so there's no problem solving access in the brain. And this happens a lot in youth kids. And then you see a lot of teaching is trying to change that and be like, do this, do this, do this. Well, they have nothing in the cortex that's allowing them to handle, do this, do this, do this. So what I would do is I would resort to physiology, and that's where breathing comes in. It's a very like centering spot where I'm trying to get them back down to the breath. Now, to answer your question of tangible, how would I do it? I would have a kid, if it was my kid and he was 12, I would have him every morning take a cold shower. And in the cold shower, I would have him feel what happens to his body, the initial response when cold water hits him. And if I wanted to do this with them, I could splash cold water on their face or put their hands in a cold bucket or their feet in a cold bucket. And all I would really want and you know this would happen, everyone knows that this would happen, is that naturally when that first cold hits you, every kid's going to go, right? And they're going to just panic. And that would be the key. That would be my first lesson if I could do it. And obviously that maybe changed what I do have a 12-year-old, but it's like, that would be my first lesson. And the first lesson I would teach in that is it would be purely to create an awareness that when you were stuck by a stimulus, a stressor, if you will, you defaulted to everything we're talking about in this podcast. You defaulted to breathing through your mouth. You defaulted to breathing into your upper lungs. You defaulted to breathing into your upper extremities, and you started breathing through these upper muscles. And then I would, now that we have technology so well, and I'm creatively thinking through this, I'm sure there's some sort of visual or video camera or something that you could show side by side to the athlete, the 12-year-old, and be like, maybe when you struck out the other day, did you notice that when you, like, look how many kids go like this to take their breath in between pitches? They go, when they're trying to find it. Well, that's the exact fight or flight breath that you get in a cold response. And that is trainable to get that out of you. You can train that out of you. So when I get hit by cold, I can go here. Or even better, I can go here. And now if I can just start there, I think you'll see a tremendous amount of progress. That would be my start. That would be a simple thing I would use.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Because again, I want to, my goal with these podcasts is always to give these parents and players like actionable steps.
Yeah.
And I think what you have to offer, I mean, look, there was obviously value. Otherwise the Giants wouldn't have had you on for 3 years.
Right.
I want to talk about, you and I had a conversation at some point this year, and you shared with me really kind of what your passion is. Cause I know at one point you're like, I kind of found myself in this like medical space, right? That's kind of how these teams looked at it. And you have an ambition of like making a bigger impact, which I think anybody listening could sense from what you're saying. You're not somebody who's doing the work that you're ultimately doing unless you have a belief that like you can make a bigger impact on other individuals in the world. How do you see yourself doing that going forward? Like if you could design the perfect role for yourself, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think the thing for me, from my perspective, whether it's a medical or a coaching side or it's consulting or it is what it is, I think the reason for me, I like teaching and I like coaching. And that's where I think that a lot of this stuff it can get gray areas, because to me, this is everything we're talking about right now is coaching. Like if you take a kid and you're teaching them how to breathe or you're using these triggers, how is that any different than a coach, an infielding coach, working the backhand, the forehand, and talking about the mechanics and the thinking and the problem solving? Like to me, it's the exact same thing. And so I've always looked at it not necessarily in like a medical side where it's like, how do you change the jaw structure and get a surgical thing and you move, and this is what's happening. And I think that can get really gray. And I think there are people who would be like me or have the same tools or teachings, whatever. And they very clearly are on a medical side. That's why I think it's just based off of the individual, because for me individually, I feel like a coach. Like I've taught and I've coached, and when I wake up in the morning, I'm getting ready to go work with a client of mine in 2 hours from now, and I'm going to coach him. I'm going to be, here's the program, here's the teachings, and we're going to be progressing and talking and working through things. And so that's just, I think for me personally, it's just comes off in a coaching side, because that's what I feel the most comfortable in. I feel the most comfortable when I feel like a coach. Now, in baseball specifically, I played baseball, right? So it's not hard for me to pick up a fungo bat and hit ground balls or a fly ball. It's not hard for me to play catch with a guy. I scouted with the Brewers for 5 years, so I've seen the perspective of watching players through that lens. And I just have a love for the game. So in my life, if I'm in the game, I feel like a coach and I feel like I'm moving towards a coach. Now, with that even said, I don't think coaching, I think a lot of people who I'm close with in the game would agree with me on this. I don't think like any of us are specifically a mental skills coach or a human performance coach. Like I think a pitching coach is very well accountable to being a human performance coach or a mental skills coach and vice versa. I think that if you're a human performance coach, like you should have a deep understanding of anatomy. You should, I mean, I have a strength and conditioning background. I've done many strength and conditioning with professional athletes for many years. And I've done very technical, mechanical things in the sport of baseball. I think that you should, I'm not saying that we would all be the thing, but I think that you should be holistic in your approaches. And in my point of view as a coach with a holistic perspective, if I were to get outside of my box of a human performance coach as Harvey Martin, I think if human performance coaching is in Major League Baseball, it should be perceived as a coach like it is talked about, but it should be a holistic point of view that is not just, I'm not just the only person doing that. I think a manager can walk barefoot outside with an athlete and talk strategy and be under the sun. And if you're talking to me, I'm going to find that more beneficial than ever being in the office under the artificial lights with cleats on. It's just the way I see the world. Like if I'm looking at progressive thinking and strategical thinking and coaching and teaching, I think these human performance tactics are not just for a human performance coach. I think it's be very beneficial if you took a pitching staff and went into a sauna and you talked about strategy. I mean, there's a reason why the Finnish government and the Finnish people use saunas for business meetings, right? There's a very, very strategic part to why we sit in a sauna and we strategize and make things happen. And it's because it turns on parts of your brain that make you think. You know there's going to be a stressor involved, so you're not going to be in there all day. So you better be impactful with your speech and you need to get going. And I think that that would be very, very progressive. And I think that that would make a lot of things make a lot of sense. But that's not just a human performance coach.
Right. So the Finnish government has meetings in saunas?
To my understanding, and I definitely think I could get fact checked on that and be inaccurate, but I was in Finland a few years ago and walking through Helsinki, their downtown, they had numerous spas and saunas, and they had an area around their capital area where they had big circular saunas. And the movement of it, the point of it was to have meetings in them.
I'm gonna try to fact check you right now
Please
to
do.
see. Okay. Yes, the Finnish government has a tradition of holding meetings in saunas as a practice known as sauna diplomacy.
There it is.
This approach leverages the relaxed and informal atmosphere of the sauna to facilitate open and candid discussions among politicians.
There it is, Matt.
Look at you, buddy.
Look at the big
What a
dog
guy.
bringing that down, bringing that out too. And I was going to hold strong too. I was going to hold strong in it. No, I went over there a few years ago. I went to Estonia too. And I went there purely to sauna. And obviously I've been a sauna nut for a long time, but when I first started doing mental skills work in the NHL, we would do physical training in the early week, and at the end of the week we would do mental skills, basically conversation. I had it in a sauna, and it was so productive for so many years. And now I transferred that over when I was with the Giants. I met with players in the sauna. That was my office, and it's so not. It's resistant because you're like, well, no one else, like, here's the off, it's just like, it's a resistant thing. But yeah, when I was over in Estonia, and same thing, it was over there. But in Helsinki, I like saw it with my eyes. Like I saw the saunas that they had available for this, and I saw their purposes for it. But the Finnish people and the Estonian people, I saunted with a guy in Estonia, and he didn't even speak English. And we just hung out for the whole morning one morning, and we like kind of talked, but I felt like I knew this guy so well. We were just jumping in the Baltic back and forth. It was a beautiful experience.
Well, look, as we wrap up, I just have a couple more questions.
Yeah, keep them coming.
What do you think, having been around pro ball now for quite a while, both as a player and then, as you said, as a coach, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think needs to happen for these players to enter professional baseball out of high school or college and be more prepared for really what they're going to face?
Hmm. That's a great question.
If there was one thing that comes to mind, you don't have to go into
Yeah,
a
yeah,
bunch of
yeah,
different things.
for sure. I got one thing in mind. So the question, if I say it back to you, just so I understand, the question is if I'm a high school or a college guy and I'm going to pro ball, right? That's the question originally, essentially. My answer to that would be pretty simple, and it would be I think you should enter pro ball with open eyes, open ears, be very open and be very curious and all these things. But I would remind myself of two things, and how this, if this happens or not, I think is subjective and dependent on the individual. The first thing I would do is I would demystify professional baseball as fast as possible. And I say that because the most successful athletes I've seen who have played significant amount of years, for whatever reason, they don't notice the 40,000 people. They don't notice. No, they do, but they don't. They don't notice the media. They don't notice the obstacles. It's like they don't even see it. And obviously, this is broken down to the moments not too big. But how I would do that if I'm sitting with somebody and I'm telling them what to do, I would lean into demystifying this thing, because the hardest part I think that happens to athletes in pro ball specifically is you see a Milwaukee Brewers logo when you're 5, whether you're even a Brewers fan or not. Like, you see these logos, you see these stadiums, you see this stuff in your face all the time. And then all of a sudden you get there and you can't see past it. You're just like, I've seen this my whole life and here it is. And you're a pro, you're an athlete, you're an artist. And I've found a lot of athletes get caught up in, I'll just use the logo example. They get caught up in the logo. They see the thing and it's too shiny and it ends up eating them alive because they never find out who they are, because they're so caught up in the mystical side of professional sports, staff included, myself included, for sure. And I think you got to get over that. I think that's also a phase. I don't think that's like you do that day one. I just think you should have that in your mind to keep demystifying this thing. The second thing I would say, very simple on that too, is that it's not that you shouldn't be coachable. I think that the more you know yourself, I think you know what coaching or teaching you are going to allow in. And I think a lot of times when you don't know who you are, you're very susceptible to taking coaching and input and advice from everybody. And I think that drowns out what your awareness is and who you actually are. And again, I say that because what I found to be very successful, in myself included, as a staff member included, is the more you know who you are, and you don't need to explain that necessarily. Just the more you know who you are, you know your own voice, you know your own self, you'll know what coaching or teaching is needed for you. And I think that if you can tackle both of those, this is both an awareness aspect. If you can be mindful and aware of that, demystifying it and knowing who you are so that you accept and allow in the accurate coaching that you need, I think you're going to be really, really successful. But I've seen the flip side of that eat people up.
Okay, so to take your second point, how, as a player, if you feel like you're getting feedback or a coach is trying to tell you something and you know that it's not something that you ultimately would benefit from,
Right.
how best do you communicate that, in your opinion, having been a coach on that side? How best do you communicate that with the coach?
Well, obviously it's easier when you trust people, right? Or you have an actual relationship, because then you can just have a conversation where you can just communicate that openly. Ideally, that's why I love the sauna. So I'm going to just plug that back in because
Right.
that neutralizes you. But I'm serious about that. I think that a lot of times in pro ball, from the player perspective, I think that this would be my answer to that. I would strategically find an environment where the environment is conducive for conversation, because so often I've seen conversations happen in pass bys or in the setting on the field, and you're not meeting people at the right times. And so and the coaches do this to the players all the time too. So if I were if this was an aggressive top tier conversation that needed to take place, if I'm the player, I'm requesting time and I'm creating an environment for a dialogue or discussion if it feels that meaningful to you. And ideally, I would do that not at the field. That's where I would try to have a coffee with somebody beforehand, or I'm serious, I would try to get in a sauna with somebody, or I would go on a walk in the outfield or walk the stadium or do something where you're in an environment that allows for actual conversation. And I think it neutralizes both parties. And I think that's intimidating when you go into a coach's office or a coach comes to your locker or you have people walking by you in the space all the time. I don't think people strategically look at the environment enough of where to have conversation, because conversation is really, really important. So if it's really valuable to you, that's what I would go after, because I think naturally the truth will come out if the environment is set, if the stage is set. And then obviously the easy answer to that is, let's say you don't have a relationship or trust, or you don't have the perfect stage for it and you need to just communicate it. I think you got to know who you are. And I think that if you know who you are and you speak from your actual voice, I think that anybody in front of you can hear that. And if someone can't hear that, that's a friction on their own selves. And I think as the individual, you can kind of let that pass. But I think you have to spend a significant amount of time, and this is for all of us, but a significant amount of time knowing your voice and saying your voice and communicating your voice. And I've found that, I know I'm talking subjectively here. It's not like that's exactly how it is, but it also is exactly how it is. Like if you can say what you're feeling and thinking, I think it gets received incredibly well. I don't know if
Well,
that gets that there, but
yeah, funny enough too, I think this ties back into the breathing, because if a player ever has difficulty communicating with, let's just say, a coach, a manager, front office official, if I was a betting man, I'd be willing to say if they're nervous or uncomfortable to have the conversation, they're probably breathing really quickly, right? And they're spiraling and it's tense.
yeah,
And most of the time, in my experience too, a lot of times the players, while they may articulate to me, hey, I had no problem having a conversation with this coach, it's still going to be somewhat overwhelming, because here's somebody, especially if you're in the minor leagues. If you're in the major leagues, it's a little, it's different, right?
Way
You
different.
feel like you have a much different voice. You're not as much concerned about like what this organization thinks.
Right.
But in the minor leagues, you feel like I'm at the mercy of what you guys ultimately want to do with my career. But you don't want to like disrupt the energy around what they think of you. You want them to feel, really positively about you in every aspect. So to have a conversation with, a front office official, a coordinator, a coach, whether a player tells me they're super comfortable with it or not, like there is an element of discomfort that undoubtedly will exist. So again, reinforcing that breath, as much as these players may listen to this and say, oh no, it's just for the game. Like it's actually not. It's for, as you said, I mean, this is something that you were and have been doing in your life. And I think no matter who you are listening to this, we can all benefit from the message about that breath, and really a lot of the stuff you said today.
Well, I think that if I may, the thing that you just said that I think is really important, and I found myself talking a lot more with big leaguers over the last couple of years. I think we drastically underestimate the importance of what goes on outside of your actual skill, especially in pro sports. I don't think athletes have a grip necessarily on how truly valuable your tone in a clubhouse is and how much that relays into your career. And looking at it like, because when you get into pro sports, like an interview in the big leagues is crucial. If you can't deliver an interview and you're reactive and you say the wrong things, or you can't, like, that's really important for your actual success as a player. So to what you just said, it triggered me to think about how important it is to holistically view your life. And that, I think that goes back to the original question. When you're a professional athlete, your voice is important, and who you are and how you communicate is really, really important. And I think I think sometimes we just default to, I'm just going to pitch. And I agree with that. I agree with the simplicity of that. Or I'm just going to hit and I'm going to do my thing. And I agree with that too. But I also think that there's strategical sides to that, because you are operating in a massive organization with a lot of people. And there's a lot of things going on. And I think that you should focus on how you talk to people, and you should hold that. I'm not saying it's more important than your fastball, but I would definitely say it's up there. It should be held in regards to your skill set. You should learn how to talk to people.
No doubt. Yeah. I mean, on some level too, these I say this all the time, but whether you're a high school kid, college kid, like you are, if you haven't realized it yet, entering a business that at one point
Correct.
was a sport.
Mm-hmm.
And what comes along with that is responsibility. Undoubtedly, you're going to have certain expectations that you're going to be, again, expected to meet. And with that comes pressure.
Right.
So how do you interact with this pressure is going to be a very, very, important skill that we all just need to continue to help these players ultimately learn and get better at dealing with. But you're never going to avoid it. There's no avoiding that.
Correct.
If you want to be successful and play this game for a long time. So, Hey, I got a question for you. So tell us about the book that you have coming out.
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. The book coming out is called Without Words. My last book was Breathe, Focus, Excel, which is entirely a lot of the stuff we were just talking about. This new book, Without Words, it's Without Words, Mastering the Art of Being. It was me taking a swing at philosophy, and there's definitely stuff in there if you're an athlete and you want to read some stuff about some modalities about health, but I did not write that for an athlete. So it's not like I mentioned, my first book is like targeted at athletes, and it is protocols.
What's the name of the first book again, just so everybody gets it clearly?
Breathe, Focus, Excel. So it's optimizing for athletes. It's all protocols. There's pictures in there about breathing. There's sauna cold protocols, etc. This next book, I talk about some health modalities that's just in my life, right? That's in my frame of thinking. So I definitely talk on certain things with what makes you healthy. But if I could break it down in a really simple term, it's more philosophical. And it's my view. It's me at least trying to portray my view on what I think this whole thing is, which is kind of a little bit different, but not different than what we've been talking about. But my perspective of what we do is that we live in life from our birth to our death with a character, right? And we have a mind and a body, which is all physical. So it's all this tangible things that exist in physical reality. And so it's exactly what you just said. Like, we're on this podcast right now, and we're podcasters. Like, I'm not a human performance coach. I'm a podcaster, and I'm working on my speech and my storytelling, et cetera, et cetera. But that's just one of my many characters that I've learned in life. The reason why I titled it Without Words is because the flip side to the material character that we play is what and what I can grasp is it's our soul. And that's without words. It's this state of nothingness. It's this potential, this limitless, this thing that we're feeling intuitively. And what is it? And I think that it's so difficult to talk about in our lives because it's without words. It's the abstract. And I was so puzzled over the years of abstract thinking that I wrote a book about it, naturally, to just help my own brain. But hopefully, ideally, it helps people as well. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there that's philosophical. There's some religion talk in there. There's hierarchy talk, modern society, history, all that sort of stuff.
When's it coming out?
December 16th.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
I'll link to it in the show notes too. So, and I'll do actually both books. That. So yeah, if people want to purchase either one, how can people follow you on social media?
Yeah, just Harvey J. Martin. I think that's on all of them. Twitter and Instagram are my guys. I have harveyjmartin.com. That's my website. You can see all that on my socials as well. And then I'll start getting a YouTube channel going here soon, which it probably is already up. But those have been the ones I've done historically, and I use those two platforms. So if you're following along, there's a lot of things that you'll see me doing on there.
Wonderful, man.
Yeah.
Well, I guess before we go, is there any parting words, anything that you that we didn't touch on that you feel like would be beneficial for travel baseball parents or players to know?
Nothing comes to mind naturally. That was a really fun conversation. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. So that was enjoyable. So thank you. I really loved those questions. Those questions made me think. I think that, okay, we'll go with that as my final thought of wisdom on that, is I think that and a lot of my book is talking about this. So without words, but my final parting words would be, in the book, I finish it with talking about these characters that we play. And I think that a lot of times, from what I've seen, myself included, I think that we get so attached to the objectiveness things that happen in life, and we identify with them. And I've seen this happen to a lot of athletes when their career's over. They have a really difficult time disassociating from that character and stepping into reality and playing a new role. And that's hard, right? But that's a death in your life. That career will end, and it's a part of your life that you're naturally going to have to grieve. I had to do it. Everyone has to do it. I haven't seen that change with any level of meaning. Like, I haven't seen someone who's made $100 million not be susceptible to that. They still struggle with the change of character. And I've seen someone just in college or high school struggle with the same struggle. And that's been really fascinating for my own brain to experience and see in real time. But if I were to suggest, that's part of why I wrote the book. I think that we have this genius inside of us that only we bring to the world, and there's a unique blueprint. And if we're chasing that intuitively, you find out what characters play best to connect you to who you are, which is, in my opinion, without words, that's your soul. And so I would just say sport is a great medium to learn the role and to learn the characters. But I think, and I'm on the journey too, I think the point of where I'm on right now is, how do you attach to these characteristics and these roles that you play in life, but then have a healthy dose of detachment and realizing that you're just out there performing in a show and you're just playing these roles, and the ability to master them calmly and freely, it allows you to express your full expression. And I think that for whatever reason, I think that brings us meaning. And I've tried to answer that for 10 plus years of what that meaning is. And I haven't found that. And I found confidence in just saying it's without words. It's just the feeling. It's my expression. It's what I do. And I've only found that to benefit me in my life. And so maybe if it benefits somebody else, that would be my final words.
I love it, man. Well, I have a secret suspicion we'll probably end up doing this again.
Right on.
Because as you don't see, I literally have pages and pages of things that I wanted to get to that I didn't even touch.
Right
so we got more to talk about in the future. But Harvey, cool. I can't thank you enough, man. I appreciate you. Looking forward to seeing how you continue to try to transform the game of baseball, the world, and all these great things that you're doing. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you too. Thank you very much.
We'll talk soon.